Are we live? Yes. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to Scars to Stars with Sara Longwe. Today, we have such a privilege. It's such a privilege to have her with us. And we're so overjoyed that we can have a Zambian that has done so much for women and the attainment of equality and women rights in Zambia. Not just in Zambia, the whole world. And her framework is being used all over the world to bring about equality and to plan for women using the Sara Longwe framework. So today, again, we welcome to our platform, Miss Sara Longwe. Thank you for joining us, ma'am. It's so good to have you back, and thank you so much. Welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us, ma'am. I know that the internet is kind of chaotic, so what we're going to be doing, we will type your questions, like we said, and you will see the questions on your chat, and then you can talk to us because we can hear you clearly. So thank you, welcome. Thank you for joining us on Scars to Stars. Okay, can we send those questions?
All right. Thanks for having me. I can see the questions now. And the first question is, who is Sara?
Yes.
Well,
please go ahead, ma.
I can go ahead.
Yes, thank you.
Well, I'm Sara Longwe. I'm a Zambian. I'm a Zambian based in Zambia, in Lusaka. And I am a feminist and activist. I started this long time ago. Like every other person, when you are being discriminated against or injustice is being done to you, you do know. I think I started knowing much earlier. I am, my background, I think, has been given. I am a secondary school teacher by training at the University of Zambia, and I've had a postgraduate training at Lancaster University, where I did organizational psychology for a diploma in postgraduate studies. And I've been working in Zambia before I went for my postgraduate studies. I worked as a secondary school teacher, as I said before, in 2 schools, Kamwala Secondary School for a term, and then 6 other years at Kablonga Girls. And I did leave the first school after 1 term because I encountered a gender discrimination and I couldn't be given maternity leave. And that was my beginning of a real public fight in Zambia against gender discrimination. At the time, in 1972, it was not allowed for any woman who is married to be enrolled or to be admitted to civil service on full-time basis. We're all part-time service workers. I didn't know this until after a term at Kamwala Secondary School, because I was already married by the time I finished my graduate studies at the University of Zambia in 1971. Then I applied for leave, and I discovered that married women were not entitled to maternity leave. I was very appalled and angry because I did find out then that Zambia had ratified the International Labour Organization agreement that they will allow married women and all women, when they are pregnant, to have paid maternity leave for 90 days. When I inquired later, I discovered that actually it was all women who were in civil service. When they went on maternity leave, they didn't get it as paid. They took their own leave, and I had just worked one term. So I only had 4 days. So that was the beginning of my struggle. Let me end there. That's who Sara Longwe is for now. Well, besides that, I found it very, very strange that they discriminated against women in that way, because not only did I women who were in civil service were not entitled to maternity paid leave, I discovered that we were all temporary employees. Every married person, a woman that is, was a temporary employee. Also discovered that we were not entitled to have several other things, like we can't have accommodation, cannot have loan, and can easily be taxed higher, because our pay was seen as just additional. They only looked at a man, and a married man for that matter, as the real breadwinner. Not only that, I discovered that I wouldn't have been employed, pregnant as I was, in the civil service had I been single, because single teachers, women, were not allowed to be pregnant, I think. I don't know why. It's just discrimination, because if you were found to be pregnant and you were a single female teacher, you were sacked, even if your partner was a fellow teacher. So which had been agreed to, and also looking at our constitution at the time, and I looked at it as a discrimination, even if it wasn't perfect, but at least it didn't allow discrimination in the manner in which I saw it. But when I read the constitution, it actually made me go look at the constitution more closely, and I discovered that discrimination against women was constitutional, because the clause against the discrimination actually did put an exception if a woman was discriminated against in marriage, in inheritance, in personal level, and that was a personal level. So that first job really opened my eye to what I'll say next with your questions, as why I became an activist and a feminist.
Yes. Can you hear us this time?
I can't see another question, but I can continue.
Yes, please.
To say that I discovered. I beg your pardon?
Please go ahead. I just was checking if you could hear us, because it's very interesting what you're sharing.
Finish your question.
So we want to know, I want to know, at that time,
yes,
in 1972 when you came into this space.
Yes,
and you realized that
it was quite annoying at the time.
Please go ahead, Ma. Can you hear us? We can hear you. Please go ahead.
Well, you're breaking again, so can you please type your question?
We will do that.
I can't hear you now. You're breaking. The next question was, why did you take up the fight when there were other women being discriminated against? Why did you feel the need to fight? I needed to fight because it seemed very unfair, because men could enter education as teachers, they could make fellow teachers pregnant, and they could still continue being teachers. And being a female isn't a sin, because nobody chose to be female. So since it wasn't by choice, I found it very, very discriminatory that female persons, be teachers, be anybody, a female, whether an older person or a younger person, were discriminated against. And at the same time, as a school teacher, let me just finish the schooling aspect. The girls were also expelled from school as soon as they were pregnant. It doesn't matter whether the other person was a fellow school person or school pupil, it didn't matter. And if it were a teacher, at least the teacher got transferred. They didn't punish the teacher. It was up to the family to charge damages and all that. But this fight went on at secondary school, but it also went on in other areas. For instance, when I was discriminated against being a female teacher who can't get maternity leave, I left, but I joined again as a teacher 3 years down the line, because I found it very appropriate, that the hours, because I had the second child by then. But I had to leave teaching again because I got discriminated against because of wearing trousers. We couldn't choose as female teachers at the school where I was at, which is Kablonga girls, to wear trousers. And yet Kablonga boys, which is next door, people wore trousers. Fellow female teachers wore trousers. So I fought that battle with even my trade union leader had to come and tell me that I needed to be a good African and wear dresses like everybody, because that was African. But I challenged him that if that is true, then why him? He was a lazy person. He didn't wear a skirt, because traditionally in the lazy community, the wearing trousers just like the Scots was a male tradition. But to cut the story short, I stood my grounds and I asked them to give us rules, which we signed, because as a teacher, you had to sign that you're going to obey. He didn't produce, and I challenged the Minister of Education. I also challenged them that I'll take them to the ombudsperson. Here we used to call them investigator generals. And the investigator general told them that they had no grounds on which to discriminate against us women. in choosing an attire, as long as it was seen as decent and appropriate. But because of that, I was marked. And I had challenged with colleagues that being part-time civil servants as women and not having all the other privileges of having a loan, of going for studies, was all wrong. And luckily, there was a commission of inquiry into civil service. And then I really started mobilizing with fellow women that we must submit. There was an organization that was in the offing, which is now known as Zambia Association for Research and Development, in short, ZAD. We were able to submit a paper which outlined all the discriminatory aspects, and they were taken on board, most of them, and the aspect of maternity leave was given. For 90 days, you get full pay, and when you come back, you shouldn't be discriminated against and lose anything that you had gained before. We also became permanent employees in civil service. And this maternity leave, I keep on going on, because at the moment, some people are still being discriminated against because they think it's just when you are a civil servant. No, it's a law. And when it's a law, it's for everybody, whether private or not. So the fight continued. But I moved on to another fight of being discriminated against if you speak out. And because I spoke out and I asked for unpaid leave to go and do my postgraduate studies, I discovered that even if I'd been working for 6 years plus, I had not been made a permanent employee. So my unpaid leave was rejected. So I quit school this time as a school teacher for the last time. And I went and paid for myself to go to Lancaster University and study organizational psychology. Why that subject? Because I was very interested to see why organizations discriminate against females so much, schools against girls so much. And when I came back, I didn't want to work for the Ministry of Education. Instead, I went to work at the University of Zambia. I found more discrimination there, but I won't go into details. I'll go into one. One of them is that I was in charge of postgraduate studies, administration, and processing examination for external examination and internal for the postgraduate students. I discovered that as an editor of a brochure for those subjects, I got into trouble because I used she to denote he as well. I didn't see anything wrong with that because the Bibles do that. They use he to denote she as well, a she pronoun. So I did put a footnote to say she denotes a male gender pronoun he as well. I got into trouble with that as well. I really had to fight my way through the university bureaucracy to allow me to continue. But it became so toxic that I decided to leave in the end. But the battle was won, that anyone who's in charge of publications can use any gender pronoun. I left the university. I worked for an NGO, World University Service, for the people who were in still not free like South Africa, Zimbabwe then, as well as Angola, Namibia, and so forth. There again, I had to leave because I discovered again there's a lot of gender discrimination. I then decided to be a consultant on my own. And as a consultant, I started being advised to work for organizations on consultancy basis because I discovered that I am allergic to being I'm allergic to being an employee, so maybe I should be on my own. So there's a question here. It says, how was the equality fight like those days compared to now? Because you seem to have been the only voice at that time. Well, the fight continues because even some laws which we have fought for collectively have been put in place. We have a hurdle of implementation. And so it has taken a lot of work by the women's movement, collectively and individually. And in my individual capacity, when I became a consultant, I was being asked to ensure that there are no other women screaming the way I'm screaming against gender inequality, so that I could assess their program, how discriminatory or undiscriminatory it was. And it was in that way that my gender framework, women's empowerment framework, which you talked about when we're having glitches, came into being. Because in trying to explain to developers and friends on how discrimination against women was under development for Africa and women in general and the whole nation as a whole, I kept on repeating this analysis in various ways. At first, it started off as 9 elements, but then towards the end of continuing to doing analysis, it became 5 elements. But to start with, this framework started off as a collective because the Zambia Association for Research and Development, we were given a consultants to do in 1986, which we finished in 1987. And by then we were using nine criteria, which was 9 points of criteria. But when we presented that report, everybody liked the report, including the people who had engaged us, except they said we were too early to produce such recommendations because the organization then was not ready to implement it. But where we had presented that that framework and report we had used, UNDP were interested in having a similar study for their work. And this time I had lost my job at the University of Zambia because of including to fight for women's rights. So I had to do this by myself. They engaged me alone. And at least I was able to see that those 9 elements we had initially were repetitive. So I was able to clean it up and only have 5 elements, which is welfare, access, conscientization, mobilization, and control. I can't go into the framework now, but it's just to say that this framework is now being used, as you said earlier, by many other activists who want to ensure that there is gender equity and equality in our society, in Africa and beyond. So the fight for women's rights goes on, and this framework is helpful. Not only was it helpful for me, but it's also helpful for other people who are able to advise their own program or other people's program to ensure that there is no gender inequality. So I see there is a question here, which you are saying, because you can ask, I can't hear it, that you say you are so proud as a Zambian woman, as my framework is being used all over the world. How do you feel that your work is bringing equality to women globally, but in Zambia, your own home, women are far from achieving equality with less than 20% participation in leadership? It's a very sad situation, but can't keep anybody behind or down. I soldier on, and that's the reason why I accepted to be with you tonight, so that I could give my story, that fighting for women's rights is not an overnight aspect. It's something that you have to do on all the time, all your lifetime, just like living. Human beings have improved themselves by continuing to get the best out of life. So similarly, discrimination is not to be there to stay. As long as we continue to show in different ways on how it is under development for the country, for the humanness as well, because we are treating women, and yet they didn't choose to be born women. So please cut that phone. Sorry about that. That's the trouble of using a cell phone. So globally, I think even globally, I am helping as well, because this framework is not only relevant for Zambia, it's also relevant in other countries. When I do travel out of Zambia, people just hear my name and they come along and ask me if I am the Sara Longwe who had brought about the Women's Empowerment Framework. And I say yes, and I feel very happy because I know that it's being used. So even here in Zambia now, it's beginning to be used, because the young people who've gone through the University of Zambia and other studies which require women's studies or gender equality studies, they do come across my framework. And I'm always ready to work with them or to chat with them and ask them to ask me whatever questions they want to ask regarding the framework. So slowly catch a monkey. I know the Zambian community is slow in catching up with the framework to use it, but we are getting there somehow. Thank you for having me. As a woman, do you feel women are rising up to take the challenge today? Yes, they are. As I said, that in the streets, even in Zambia, now that with the Facebook, and I'm active on Facebook, when they meet me in person, they ask me if I'm the one in the Facebook who had been commenting on various issues. And they tell me that they use the framework. So that means the challenge hasn't stopped. We are going on. And now that we are going for elections, or every elections, I have been involved through the women's movement to ensure that parties nominate women. And we haven't been too successful, but we have been to some extent that we have an incremental presence of women in parliament and in councils. And I work with organizations now like Gender Links, if you've heard of it, which is trying to work with women at grassroots level through councils, as councillors, as well as just people who work in the council, so that the council takes into account the contribution of women. So that's a big job we need to do. I know we started off like in all other countries. They started off pushing for women in parliament, which hasn't been successful. And now we are looking also at pushing women in councils, which is closer to the people. So in Zambia, I think we should continue to fight. And it's just the beginning. And we have worked collectively in getting various laws in place. So we've had the Anti-GBV Act. We have the Gender Equity Equality Act. We've had the inheritance. I was very much involved in all these acts, and especially the Inheritance Act, where the deceased does not leave a will. So the fight is on, and we need to intensify. That's what we need to do. We do have the laws in place. I think the laws in place need to be enforced, and the Women's Empowerment Framework will help us to see where the bottlenecks are. And this depends on how active and how involved we are in what is happening and speaking out. And of course, challenges are there. And there's a question here. As a woman, do you feel women are rising to take the challenge? Yes, and as I was explaining, one of the challenges is to litigate. And I think we are getting there to litigate, because the laws are there. If we don't use them, they will just be sitting there. So the challenge in attaining equality is to be active, is to take action. Collectively is much more sustainable than individually. But what leadership lessons has your leadership journey taught you that you would like to pass on to the next generation? You got to start whenever you feel injustice being done to you. Don't just leave it to yourself. You got to speak out. I know I started off by saying it was when I was in secondary school, but I started much earlier. Not when I was a teacher at secondary school, much earlier, even within the family. I have taken my family to task when an injustice is being done. Taken my father before family tribunal for him to testify how bad it is to discriminate against his own children just because it's a woman. And also corporal punishment, I've challenged it at a family level when I was a kid myself. And also when I was a schoolgirl myself, I challenged this aspect of saying girls go to domestic, boys go and do science. I challenged this. There's no time to talk about that. But I challenged it beforehand, before I became an adult. at any level. So at any level, every girl should always speak out if something is going wrong. Don't wait for adults to speak out on your behalf. Go to the adults, challenge them. And now there are laws, there are women's organizations, there are churches, there are groupings. Get involved. And this is the only way leadership in fighting for your own rights and fighting for other people's rights um, become a reality. And it makes you being the leader if you happen to be the one pushing for equality where other people haven't done before because they took it for granted. So we must all start fighting for injustice whenever we come across it, regardless of our age. So that's the lesson I can give. I can't see the next question. I don't know if you have another question, Pastor Jolomoni. And if there's any clarity you want me to repeat, because those glitches put me off for a while.
But there is a question there, and we do thank you. We know
Hello?
it's such a... Can you hear us? We know it has been a challenge working with the glitches, and we would like to just appreciate you and thank you for your 50 years, over 50 years of standing up for women. You've been a leader, and you have been challenging every limitation. You have worked with making sure CEDAW is ratified in Zambia. You have gone on to so many other achievements. Your framework is doing it for all the women all over the world. So I really want to thank you for this time. We're looking forward to a face-to-face so that the internet does not act as the barrier of robbing us of the richness of your story and your life. So we would look forward to hoping that you would have time where we could come to you face-to-face. I know there's Corona, but thank God Corona is going down and vaccines are coming into Zambia now so that we can meet face-to-face and have a live recording
I
of
hear
your wonderful experience with us.
Yes.
So today we just celebrate you, and we want to thank you so, so much for being a champion for women and for your zeal and your consistency over 50 years. We can't but celebrate you as an awesome, awesome, awesome woman leader. And we thank you for having your time, spending time with us today, answering the questions we have put to you. And thank you for being that person to us in Zambia. You're an icon, you're a role model, you're an example of what a leader should be, particularly having fought not for yourself or just for yourself, but for every woman. Thank you so much, Ma. We appreciate that. So we'll be looking forward to getting, for all our viewers, we're sorry on CBC, the internet also, I think, has affected, but we're going to be playing back what we have recorded on CBC. So please look out for it, Sara Longwe. And like we've said, we're going to have another interview with her where we can have her in studio or have her at her home and we can talk to her without this. Based on Corona, we had thought this was better as an elderly person, that this may have been a better way, but obviously the challenges on that side. So we look forward to having her again. Thank you for joining us, Scars to Stars. Scars to Stars today, we wanted to bring you one of the foremost women leaders in the history of Zambia, a woman that has fought for the rights of every woman. Through her and through her fight, women have been given the rights to live and live with pay and many other things. You heard her story, a bit of it, and we look forward to catching up with her again and to conclude this interview with Sara Longwe. For you, please join us tomorrow as we have another wonderful interview and profile of another great Zambian woman doing great things all over the world, flying the flag of Zambia in leadership and showing us that women are doing great and even greater in leadership. Have a wonderful evening. God bless you. and look forward to joining you tomorrow again on Scars the Stars. Thank you so much. Good night.